Looks like we have everyone in, so I can get going. Um, okay. Good morning, everyone. So today's workshop is scheduled to discuss proposed amendments to the Advanced Clean Trucks Regulation on a pooling concept. So for background, in 2020, our board voted to adopt the Advanced Clean Trucks Regulation, which requires medium and heavy-duty manufacturers to sell an increasing portion of sales as zero-emission vehicles. Last year, CARB and the nation's leading truck manufacturers signed the Clean Truck Partnership. As one of the commitments in the agreement, we are here to discuss a concept which will offer manufacturers increased flexibility between the states which have adopted the Advanced Clean Trucks Regulation. My name is Paul Ornasia, and I'm managing the efforts for this rulemaking. I'm joined by several of my colleagues, including Brand Chief Tony Brazil and lead staff Kat Talamontes. I'm also joined by two representatives from our partner states, Rachel Sokada from the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality and Scott Griffin from the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. So first, to take care of some housekeeping, today's meeting is being presented in a virtual format via Zoom. This meeting is being recorded, and a copy of this recording will be made available on our website within a few days. During the question and answer portion of this webinar, participants will need to use the raise hands feature of the Zoom platform and unmute themselves when called upon. Please note the chat function in Zoom will not be available. When commenting, please introduce yourself by stating your name and affiliation. Last fall, we held a kickoff workshop to begin discussions of a pooling concept. Over the past year, CARB and our fellow Section 177 states have worked together to develop the concept presented today. This is an initial concept which we expect to refine over the upcoming months as we work with manufacturers and other stakeholders. Ultimately, we're hoping to reach a proposal which balances manufacturers' needs for compliance flexibility and the state's needs to achieve needed environmental benefits. Okay, with all that said, let me pass out to Kat, who will walk through today's presentation.
Thank you, Paul. And just to confirm that my screen is viewable.
I'm not seeing anything right now.
Okay. How about now?
Yes.
Okay. Excellent. All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Kat Talamontes, and I will be taking us through today's presentation. So to start, I will be first providing an overview of some background information on the Advanced Clean Trucks Regulation. So the ACT regulation was adopted by the board in June of 2020 to accelerate commercial deployment of zero-emission vehicles, or ZEVs, and contribute towards meeting the state's air quality and climate mitigation targets. The regulation establishes requirements for medium and heavy-duty manufacturers to sell an increasing portion of their sales as zero-emission, starting in the 2024 model year and ramping up through 2035. It provides credit for early sales, flexibility to make up a deficit within one model year, and the ability for manufacturers to bank in trade credits. We had some amendments approved by the board in October of this year that extended the deficit makeup period from one model year to 3 model years. This slide provides an overview of how credits and deficits are generated under the ACT regulation, as well as how compliance is achieved. So first, compliance is determined by the generation of credits and deficits, which is based on a manufacturer's sales of both zero-emission and internal combustion engine vehicles for a given model year. As part of the amendments to ACT approved by the board in October of this year, omnibus-compliant heavy-duty engines are excluded from the deficit generation under ACT for the 2026 model year, which will increase the number of omnibus-compliant engines amongst the heavy-duty classes in 2026. The generation of both credits and deficits include a weight class modifier that accounts for heavier vehicles generating more emissions. As shown in the figure on this slide, the class 7 and 8 tractors have a weight class modifier of 2.5, while the class 2B and 3 vehicle category has a weight class modifier of 0.8. The credits and deficits are also grouped into two categories, one being for class 7 and 8 tractors, and the other category covers the remaining vehicles. Class 7 and 8 tractor deficits must be met with tractor credits, while the non-tractor deficits may be met with any credits. And lastly, compliance is achieved when a manufacturer's total credits retired exceeds their total deficits. The ACT regulation has a number of flexibilities to assist manufacturers in complying with the requirements. The bullets on this slide, denoted by asterisks, are recent changes approved by the board in October of this year. So first, early action credits may be earned before the regulation goes into effect. Credits may be banked for future use, and credits may also be traded between manufacturers. Secondary vehicle manufacturers may also now opt into the credit trading and banking system. Near zero emission vehicle or NZEV credits may fulfill up to 50% of deficits. Deficits may also be carried forward for 3 years under the deficit makeup period. NZEV credits may also be used to fulfill a deficit utilizing the deficit makeup period. Low tractor volume sales may also be offset with non-tractor credits. And lastly, manufacturers with an average of less than 500 annual on-road vehicle sales are exempt from the rules requirements under the low volume exemption. And now to provide an update on the ACT regulation. Based on information reported in 2021 and 2022, manufacturers are currently 2 years ahead of compliance with the regulation and have already produced enough ZEVs to meet the 2024 and 2025 requirements. The data for the 2023 model year shows that ZEVs make up about 16% of the total new medium and heavy-duty vehicle sales in California, which is nearly double from 2022. And lastly, 10 other states have adopted ACT so far, cumulatively accounting for about 25% of medium and heavy-duty truck sales in the US. In July of 2023, CARB announced a Clean Truck Partnership Agreement with the nation's leading major truck manufacturers. The agreement advances the development of ZEVs for the trucking industry and provides flexibility for manufacturers to meet emissions requirements while reaching the state's climate and emissions reduction goals. The agreement marks a commitment from the manufacturers to meet California's vehicle standards, including standards that will require manufacturers to only produce and sell ZEVs starting with the 2036 model year. And as part of the agreement, CARB agreed to propose a pooling concept for credits and deficits generated in states that have adopted the ACT regulation under Section 177 of the Federal Clean Air Act to the board as early as possible. And I will now provide an overview of the proposed pooling concept. This slide describes what we mean by pooling, and it's a flexibility provision that allows manufacturers to use overcompliance in one state to make up for deficits in another state, which essentially means that manufacturers can move extra credits generated in one state to cover an outstanding deficit in another state. This type of provision is also currently being used in the light-duty ZEV regulations. And as mentioned earlier, CARB agreed to propose a pooling concept for credits and deficits generated in states that have adopted the ACT regulation under the Clean Truck Partnership Agreement. And as also part of this agreement, CARB was required to hold a public workshop on incorporating a pooling concept into the Advanced Clean Trucks regulation, which was held in November of 2023. And CARB has also since been working with the Section 177 states that have adopted Advanced Clean Trucks to develop a pooling concept. And we will also plan on continuing those conversations as well as include the manufacturers moving forward. I will now go over the basics of the concept. So first, pooling will only apply to states that have adopted ACT, and we are proposing to only permit pooling for the 2027 through the 2031 model years. We are proposing to limit the surplus credits that can be transferred to other states to only those credits generated in the most recent model year, as opposed to credits banked from a previous model year, which will incentivize overcompliance. We are also planning on setting caps on transfers in 2 ways. First, we are proposing to cap the total annual credit transfers into a state with a shortfall. And second, we are proposing a cap on the percent of credits that come from any one state. But I'll get more into the details of these concepts in a few slides. Pooling can also be used concurrently with the deficit makeup period, which I will also go over in a few slides to demonstrate how the two provisions would work together. And lastly, pooling can only be used to offset an immediate deficit, meaning that a manufacturer will not be able to proactively transfer surplus credits to cover future deficits in another state. We are also proposing to limit the scope of pooling to tractors only, and this is for several reasons. First, within ACT, manufacturers are provided less flexibility with regards to which credits can be used to make up tractor deficits, as tractor deficits can only be met with tractor credits. It also makes sense to allow for some additional flexibility here because tractors functionally operate differently than other vehicles covered under ACT, as tractors frequently operate across state lines and aren't always operating where the vehicle was delivered for sale. So the emissions benefits for a zero-emission tractor can be spread amongst multiple states, whereas other non-tractor vehicle types primarily operate within one region and predominantly return to the same facility. Infrastructure issues for these vehicle types are also easier to overcome. And non-tractors additionally have more flexibility options available since deficits for non-tractors can be met with any type of credits. With that being said, we are open to hearing feedback on whether pooling should be made available more broadly. And as mentioned earlier, we are proposing to establish annual caps on the number of credits that can be transferred. And the table on this slide shows the maximum percentage of credits that can be transferred into a state. So for 2027, the first year of pooling, we are proposing to set the cap at 20% of the total deficits generated in the state. And this will decline by 4% each model year through 2031. We are also proposing to limit the number of credits that can be transferred from one state into another state at 25%. So for a manufacturer to maximize pooling in one state, they would need to generate excess credit in at least 4 other states. This figure provides a graphical representation of what pooling could look like. The dark blue color on the column represents the number of credits a manufacturer would need to generate with zero-emission trucks delivered for sale within the state, while the other colors represent the credits that could be transferred in from other states through pooling. So as you can see here, that pooling portion of the column decreases through 2031, reflecting the decreasing maximum allowable credits that can be transferred. And to outline how the concept would work in practice, I'm going to go over 3 examples that will increase in complexity. So this first example here starts as a basic example of a manufacturer complying in 2027 using pooling only. So in this scenario, the manufacturer generates 1,000 deficits and 800 credits, which results in a total net balance of 200 deficits for the 2027 model year. And in 2027, a manufacturer can use pooling to cover 20% of their credit obligations per the 2027 credit transfer allowance, which happens to be 200 credits for this example. So therefore, the manufacturer can transfer in a maximum of 200 credits from other states. And to do this, they would need 50 surplus credits from 4 other states because a state can only transfer a maximum of 25%. So in this example, the manufacturer is able to offset the outstanding deficit balance entirely through pooling. In this second example, the manufacturer will be using pooling in 2027, like in the first example, followed by utilizing the 3-year deficit makeup period alone to comply through 2030. So this example also demonstrates compliance with the deficit makeup period throughout the 3 model year time frame. So we're setting that standard. And in this scenario, the manufacturer generates 1,000 deficits and 500 credits in 2027, which results in a total net balance of 500 deficits for the 2027 model year. And in 2027, a manufacturer can use pooling to cover 20% of their credit obligations, which is 200 credits in this example. And after applying the pooling contribution, the manufacturer ends up with a balance of 300 deficits that are carried over to the 2028 model year through the deficit makeup period. So moving into 2028, the manufacturer generates 700 new deficits and 875 new credits. So given that 300 deficits were carried over from the 2027 model year, the total net balance by the end of the 2028 model year is 125 deficits. And this balance is carried over to the 2029 model year. And the same process occurs in 2029. So by the end of the 2030 model year, the total net balance is 30 credits, and the outstanding deficit balance has been offset by the end of the 3-year makeup period. In this third example, the manufacturer will be using pooling in 2027, followed by a combination of pooling and the deficit makeup period to comply through 2030. And again, this example also demonstrates compliance with the deficit makeup period throughout the 3 model year timeframe. So this example begins exactly the same as the previous example. So by the end of the 2027 model year, after pooling, the manufacturer ends up with a balance of 300 deficits that is carried over to 2028. So in 2028, the manufacturer here generates 700 new deficits and 875 new credits. So in 2028, the manufacturer could first clear the 300 deficits carried over from 2027 with new 2028 credits. Then second, use the remaining 575 new credits to clear 575 of the 700 new deficits, leaving a total of 125 new deficits. Then the manufacturer could utilize pooling for 16% of the total new deficits because the maximum credit transfer allowance for 2028 is 16%. So therefore, 112 credits can come from other states with no more than 28 credits coming from a single state. So to summarize, the total net balance by the end of the 2028 model year following the pooling contribution is 13 deficits, which are carried over into 2029. And the same process occurs in 2029. And by the end of the 2030 model year, the total net balance is 98 credits, and the outstanding deficit balance has been offset by the end of the 3-year makeup period with help from pooling. So the key takeaway from this scenario is that the combination of using pooling and the deficit makeup period provides additional flexibility to the manufacturers. However, it does add some complexity as shown in this example and could also reduce the number of ZEVs delivered for sale in a state in the short term. But those are the complexities that we are demonstrating here through these examples. So in addition to pooling, we are also looking into making some other potential changes to ACT as part of this rulemaking process in response to comments we've received. So the first is looking at whether the all-electric range for larger Class 6 and 7 NZEVs should be adjusted, in addition to looking into whether the test procedures for certifying NZEVs needs to be updated as well. And lastly, we're also looking at increasing flexibility for the credit retirement order. And finally, for the next steps, we will continue to work with stakeholders to refine the proposal, and we're requesting feedback by January 3rd of 2025. And we plan to have another public workshop in early 2025 that will cover the draft regulatory text. We are also planning to propose the amendments to the board in the summer or fall time of next year to complete the rulemaking by the end of 2025. So we will now move on to the discussion portion of the proposal. So if you would like an opportunity to comment, please raise your hand in Zoom and you will be called on to speak after staff unmute your microphone. And just a reminder, if you could please state your name and affiliation first. And please be mindful of the number of commenters today and the limited time we have to hear all the comments. So please keep your comments to a few minutes. And you may also submit written comments for staff consideration by email at actreporting@arb.ca.gov, also by January 3rd of 2025. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jill for the comment portion.
Thank you. We have a question from Joshua Lovelace. You can unmute and ask your question.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. My name is Joshua Lovelace with Miller Industries. We manufacture towing and recovery equipment, and I'm based in California. I've been to a couple of the CARB hearings in Sacramento and One thing that first of all, I appreciate the workshop here. This gives me some insight onto how the credit market is going to work. A point that I will bring up is our industry is very different from the trucking industry as a whole in that our chassis are extremely nuanced, and we currently have zero options for a ZEV chassis to mount any size wrecker or carrier to. It simply does not exist. And if any of you have heard me speak before, I've said these same things. I just feel the need to bring it up. I feel very strongly about it. We're 100% willing to look into anything that will come available. And again, I have customers that are chomping at the bit to say, hey, I want to be the first one with a ZEV tow truck. They just simply don't exist, unfortunately. So I ask that that be taken into consideration. And we have no clarity into the credit market as a secondary manufacturer. So we manufacture the body, we then mount it to a chassis. And I guess I'm asking for more clarity. And again, thank you for the slides. They help. I've actually taken some screenshots. We just have no clarity. We cannot purchase credits. We cannot sell credits. So that sort of leaves us in a void. And again, we're a small part of the trucking industry. I just ask that some consideration be taken for our industry because we are the stewards of the highway. We're the ones that keep everything moving. If an accident happens on the 5, the 101, the 99. So I appreciate your time very much. Thank you.
Thank you. So there's a couple things. First, for anyone watching, we did post a presentation online, I believe last Thursday or Friday. So I don't know if we can send a link out, but it is posted on our Advanced Clean Trucks webpage under the meetings and events area. Second, I think this goes back to the other rulemaking we are wrapping up on, the Advanced Clean Trucks amendments, is that we do hear that there are definitely concerns right now about product availability. We did take action in recent months to try to alleviate this, but we are definitely keeping a watch on the market. We do recognize not every segment of the market has a zero emission option available, but at the same time, as Kat covered earlier in the presentation, we did design the Advanced Clean Trucks regulation with a number of different flexibilities for manufacturers and the parties who rely on the trucks from the manufacturers. So manufacturers have options on where they can focus their ZEV sales. They have options on whether they want to buy or trade credits, which we're seeing more of in recently. So there are different things available. We do hear the comment. We'll keep an eye on this. Or us and our board definitely made that clear. But yeah, I think I'll pause there to see if there's anyone else on our side who wants to jump in on that. Okay. Well, thank you for the comment.
Thank you, Joshua. Next is Christian Corby. You can unmute and ask your question.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Christian Corby, and I'm the Deputy Executive Director.
It looks like you went on mute again.
Okay, I'm back on. Does that work?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Hi, everyone. Deputy Executive Director at the California Electric Transportation Coalition. And I really appreciate CARB staff putting this together. I know we've heard from a lot of our medium and heavy duty OEM members that credit pooling is going to be really important to them being able to meet this regulation across the country. So really appreciate you guys working with the Clean Truck Partnership and putting this together. So I'm not super familiar with how this works in the light duty rule. So perhaps you could give me a little bit of background on that, or give us a little background on that. I think the one question I have would be, if the light duty rule does this, I'm interested in kind of knowing how it performed in the past, but with the kind of reduction down in the credit transfer allowance starting at 20% and then ratcheting down to 4%. I guess I'm kind of wondering, I understand the purpose, it's kind of, you're kind of trying to constrict the market so you can't just use a ton of credits that you're generating in, high ZEV production space to kind of move them over to the low production space. But that being said, perhaps it might be a little bit better, given the other restrictions in this credit pooling market, to just set it at 15% and just say, okay, it's going to be 15% for 4 years, and then we'll readjust if we feel like there's, I don't know, if you feel like it's become imbalanced. I think the reason I'm suggesting that is just because right now I see a lot of OEMs struggling to make certain vehicles. There are certain vehicles that are going to work really well. The last mile delivery, box trucks, maybe even light duty pickups, or medium duty pickups. But they just need a little bit more consistency in the market. So I guess I'm just not sure if ratcheting it down that quickly is going to, provide them the assurances that they need to plan over these next, 4, 5, 10 years. So just a consideration, and I look forward to providing additional comments in writing. Thank you.
Thank you. I guess an initial response, we can definitely take that back and think about is that I think we want some feedback on like what specific issues that OEMs are foreseeing and kind of design this program around those specific issues. So one of the main rationales we had for ratcheting down the percentages over the pooling allowance over time is to make sure that ultimately the states can still return to the requirements that they achieve the requirements that they were expecting when they adopted the regulation. So, but we do also see there might be a different need where that manufacturers need some flex. It kind of becomes a question: do manufacturers need flexibility in the near term, just as the market develops, or do they need some amount of limited flexibility over a longer period just to deal with these fluctuations or variances that just occur in the number of different states that need to adopt? So, I think we're definitely open to hearing like the specific use case and examples, any data that's available, and adjusting the program based on that. But we want ultimately we want to design this program to meet the certain needs that the manufacturers have while maintaining needed benefits in each of the states.
Okay, good. Thank you, Paul. That helps. I'll take that question back and see if I can get some feedback. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Robert Marzoni, you are up next. Let's see, Robert, are you able to unmute?
It says you're unmuted, but I'm not hearing anything. There might be an issue with the audio on your end. Or with the microphone on your end, I guess.
We can come back to Robert, but there are no other questions at this time. So, John Costin.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, now we've got a few more. Hang on. Okay, I'm gonna move from Robert and I'm gonna move to John Costantino.
Hey, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. So John Costantino out of Sacramento. A couple of process questions. First, because there's a comment submission to an email only, I'm asking is there going to be a docket so we can see the public can see how many comments came in and who submitted what comments to you guys on this?
I think we're open to doing that. The main consideration we have is that we also have a separate rulemaking going on at the same time, the Advancing Trucks Amendment. So I think we're hoping to close that one out. We don't want confusion between the two rulemakings and the two dockets, but I think we are open to having another docket.
Yeah, I would say that folks that are in this space are sophisticated enough that they can keep track of which docket they're looking at, and I find it valuable to see what others have said. And this has been a comment that I've made on behalf of SEEB and others a number of times, that transparency in this rulemaking is important. The next question is, would other states have to make similar updates once this amendment happens, and what kind of timeline does that require for other states? Do they have to wait till after this gets fully implemented and a waiver is approved, or is there a waiver issue? I'm just trying to figure out how this impacts other states down the road.
I think both Scott and Rachel would want to comment on that one. I think Scott was first.
Sure, yeah, just real quick. So yeah, any amendments made by CARB would have to be adopted by each of the Clean Air Act 177 states. The rulemaking process is going to vary depending on the state. To the extent possible, we would start our process before CARB's amendments get finalized to try to save us a little bit of time. But typically after CARB adoption of the amendments in New York State, we'd be looking at like roughly 6 to 8 months.
And I'll just echo pretty much what Scott said. Each process varies by state. For Oregon, we've typically, it's varied. We have started the rule processes. CARB is also finalizing their rule amendments so that we could adopt them quickly. So it just depends on the timing of everything. But for Oregon, a rule can also take anywhere between 6 to 12 months, just depending on how quickly we need to move.
And I can add that that's part of the reason why we have this proposal starting for the 2027 year, as we expect each state will need a bit of time to, hopefully we can finish in 2025, then each state will have some time to adopt it over the course of 26, and then we can move forward in 27.
Okay, let me ask one final question if I can. Has there been any analysis or modeling to show that these pooling numbers work, that these are the right numbers, or where do these numbers actually come from?
I think generally we worked to see like they were based on one in part some influence from what we've done in the light duty program before. We have looked at the expected ZEV sales numbers in California, the expected ZEV sales number. California's a little bit different that we have adopted the advanced clean fleets regulation. So that's one factor kind of went into this analysis. But we do have the sales numbers from that and others, and just I think this is just to see like based on this, we think this does provide a significant amount of flexibility, but we are open to hearing from manufacturers and others just if based on their expectation or if they have data on whether or not it would be sufficient for them.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Sorry, my name is Suman Balish from Bluebird Corporation. I utilized my friend's link, Robert. That's why I was showing up as Robert, but I didn't realize you guys were talking to me. Couple of questions regarding this credit pooling. Once this is approved, is this a forum that CARB will maintain? Like how you are maintaining the ACT credit specific for CARB? Is this something that you will monitor? You'll have a separate website and it will be public information. And on that note, all the trading activities that needs to be done within the state to state, will it have to go through CARB and you will be the one that will be monitoring it? And to finish up with, its vocational vehicles is the category in which there is a lot of unique applications and unique vehicles, like one of the friend mentioned about tow trucks. So just trying to understand your rationale behind why vocational vehicles were restricted from this pooling. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks. On the first one, I'll see if Tony has any input, but I'll get started. So right now, we do have the reporting system actors that we use for the advanced lean truck system. I think we would need to figure out the implementation portion, like what portions are we responsible versus other states. So it might be too early to comment, but I think I don't know. Do you have anything to add there, Tony?
No, appreciate the comment because that gives us something to think about. So as you might be aware, in the existing regulation, we do specify what information we'll be posting about the sales that have occurred in California. And so we've been posting that information to the extent that we need to or want to put that in the regulatory text to say, hey, we're going to also identify credit trades among or between states. That's something we can think about on either how or what to do in that arena. And then, yeah, practically speaking, at this point, we're modifying the system at the moment, but we are coordinating the system, the detail about who posts what. I mean, I think right now on its face, we would post information relevant to California, and if trades were transferred out of state or into the state, I could see us putting that information somewhere. And I think that's a discussion topic. So wouldn't mind getting feedback if there's any issues there. And then if we put the language in the rule, then presumably when other states were to adopt the provisions associated with it, they would provide the same kind of information for their own state is probably the most straightforward way to do that. And then obviously, since we all have a collective interest in the outcome, I think we can work together between the states and California in terms of if there's ways to simplify that information sharing part.
Yeah, because today in our ACT reports that we submit information about 6 other states. So when we talk to individual states, they said they will work with you to retrieve ACT information. But with this credit pooling, we're not sure whether we still have to completely submit every state information to California, and you will be the source to share all this information, or it has to go through individual states. The same with trading. Do we have to keep California in every trade or some trades? That's where maybe if some light is shed on in future, that will help.
Sure. Let me throw out some ideas here, because then to the triggers any comments that we get, either today or even after today. So there's kind of a couple of approaches that can be taken, but I think the most basic approach would be that the manufacturer would identify, look, there's this many credits, one that I have in a given state, and that I want to transfer X number to a different state. And so at minimum, there would have to be communication with both states that are affected, the one that you would be removing credits from, and the other one you'd be moving them to. So to me, there would be that information has to be disclosed somehow between the two states. And so if there's multiple transactions, we could set it up where the manufacturer would identify, here's the trades I want to occur, and then the information between each of the two states that would otherwise be affected get shared to make sure that, yes, the manufacturer has a credit balance, meets the criteria, and then that the criteria in for how many credits get transferred is also being met. There could be other ways to do that more automated, but I'm not sure if the preference, frankly, is to have the manufacturer individually outline in advance, here's the transactions I want to make among all the states, and then loop in each of the relevant state representatives, or would there be a different method to do that might be a little more automated? And it could be checked after the fact. So there's some discussion, I think, there. I see, Rachel, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to note that, under the Advanced Clean Cars program, there is sort of like one central database that CARB does administer, but the states have administration rights, to only see sort of like the credits and deficits that are being accrued in the state, also in their state, also the ability to authorize transfers under the pooling concept for Advanced Clean Cars. One other thing I'll note is, under the ACC program, California was not part of that pool. And so we were able to work with the other states. I know under ACC2, California will be, and also under ACT, California is also being included. So I would think, one of the things to consider for CARB is, something similar to what was established under ACC, because it kind of just helps, I think, for the manufacturers just to report to one database. It also is easier for the states to administer on our end. And then I know that for the state of Oregon, we publish sort of our credit banks at the end of every model year under ACC. So then manufacturers and others can see sort of, what the overall balance is. So just another thing for food for thought.
Thank you.
Paul, on that note, the question regarding why vocational vehicles were not considered.
Oh, yeah. Could you flip back to the slide about the tractors, Cat? I think broadly, we see that the need is more acute for tractors just because we do see that they go between state lines. There's less of connection between where they are purchased and where they're operated. So we definitely see the need there. We see that for vocational vehicles. Generally, they're more often a return to base type vehicle. They are located and serve a specific area. They don't go between state lines as often, although I do recognize in the Northeast the state lines are a bit closer than they are in California. So that was the original concept, and we are open to hearing thoughts and feedback on whether if it's needed for other vehicles and what the rationale would be for other types of vehicles.
Yeah, and I'll add to that. It's like, yeah, we're interested in having some data behind a basis for expanding it. And I think as Paul touched on earlier, what is the specific issue trying to be addressed as opposed to something more generic without um, something we can point to and use to inform a decision point.
Yeah, not taking too much time, but from a manufacturer perspective, it's the vocational category in which there is such huge diversity of the amount of variations in the products that we offer. And unfortunately, since the volume is too high, some states which are small, where the volumes cannot be justified when it comes to EV and the infrastructure is not ready to support such EVs, those are the states in which we will be in a major issue because of wide variety of options that are within the vocational category. That's where having pooling would be very beneficial. If one state offers a lot of good incentives, great penetration of infrastructure, and we are able to sell more vehicles there, then that is something that we can benefit with this pooling to offset others where there is no funding, less infrastructure, and less penetration of electrification. So that was the thought.
And I'll just kind of throw out there for everyone. I mean, at the end of the day, this is a bit of a balancing act to a degree. I mean, I think broadly, each state is interested, obviously, in getting the zero emission vehicles there for meeting the air quality needs. And to the extent that pooling allows for fewer vehicles to be sold in a given state and transferred to another, then you have one, less assurance on the emissions benefits, but two, any policies that might be put in place to facilitate infrastructure expansion are also harder to justify if you can't be as certain about the ZEV deployments in your area too. And so there's a bit of a balancing act. And so again, it's like, what is it that we can use? Because I think I'll just pose the question for the group. It's if there's vehicles that are generally return to base type operations, the broader general expectation was many of those would want and likely benefit from in depot type installations of infrastructure. And effectively, if you're talking EVs, battery electric, you charge overnight, for instance, and then do your daily operation and then return to the same location. You don't necessarily need retail infrastructure other than for unexpected uses or unplanned events, for instance, which is very different than tractor operations, even though they do have return to base operations. A lot of them are going to be away from the home base location and may not return daily, and therefore the need for retail is much, much higher. So it's to the extent that those differences are critical to be addressed for the non-tractor category. We're referring here as vocational, but even the box trucks and other things. More information we can have behind it and the need for it would be very helpful and appreciated.
Thank you. Let's move on to Luke Spinolo. You can unmute.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
This is Luke Spinolo from Ford Motor Company. I just wanted to ask a question about the second to last slide that labeled other discussion topics. There were two NZEV topics on there, one about adjusting all electric range for larger NZEVs and the other about updated test procedures. Is there going to be more detail provided about those topics, and is the timeline the same as for the credit pooling topics, or is that a later presentation on a separate timeline?
Okay, I think first we do believe we can include all these topics within the pooling rulemaking. So one rulemaking takes less time than two rulemaking, so we think we can fit these in here. We have received comments from a number of manufacturers. These are areas we should look into, so we are kind of open to the topic and wondering if the broader community has feedback. But I think this is just meant to tee up the discussion, and we can have more detailed discussions in future meetings and future workshops.
Okay, so to be clear, there's not going to be any further technical detail provided before the January 3rd request for comment?
I don't believe so. I think maybe we just want to hear from the bar community on these topics specifically what they will be looking for. Like for example, we heard that all electric range with larger NZEVs is a topic that we should be looking at. So if anyone has any feedback on what that might look like, or NZEVs broadly, we are aware that NZEV test procedures have come up a number of times from a number of manufacturers. We are aware that EPA is working on some work relating to plug-in hybrid vehicles may be relevant. So just broadly, if anyone has feedback, we're kind of interested in hearing that or any details. But I don't think we plan at this point to share any more technical stuff. We're kind of just seeking feedback on these are topics that we've heard. If you have any thoughts or feedback on what we should be changing here, just to get that feedback from any interested stakeholder. And if there's other topics not on this list, we can definitely hear that also. We really just want to make sure that we are mainly looking for minor change. We're not looking to change like the overall requirements of the regulation, but more technical things or smaller issues, we are happy to hear everyone out on.
I can just jump in and say that, yeah, on each of these topics, we've been approached by at least one manufacturer on some modifications here. And it's like, okay, we need to get the details as what is the issue, so the NZEV test procedures, for instance, it's either there's some challenges or interpretation questions for manufacturers are probably looking to make some NZEVs available. And to the extent that's something that we can address in this rulemaking, we need to know what it is, because it is beyond what we're currently or otherwise discussing under pooling, because the NZEV test procedures are not in the ACT regulation per se, but would be relevant to somebody who wants to certify NZEVs for sale. And so we're open to addressing an issue. And that's why we're teeing it up here, and that's why we don't have something specific, because it's like we need details on what a particular issue or concern might be before we can actually craft a solution. And so we're trying to get everybody to be aware that there's some questions there. So if you are looking at the same issue, if you bring it to our attention, maybe you have a different concern that it's possible we can address. And to, as Paul mentioned, do it in this one rulemaking rather than have to follow up with a subsequent rulemaking in some point.
Okay, yep, that makes sense. Thanks for including it here and raising the awareness today.
Thank you. Let's
You know what,
go
and-
to,
Oh, go ahead.
sorry, are we moving on?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Lacey Robertson, you can unmute and ask your question.
Thank you. Lacey Robertson with Rush Enterprises. I just wanted to reiterate the need to publicly post the credit and deficit data by state. It's really hard to address the situation and come up with solutions if we don't have a central database that is tracking all of this data so that all of the stakeholders can weigh in. And is there any way that we could get that data before the January comment deadline?
I guess there's a couple things there. First, in terms of the reporting, well, I can speak for California and how we try to approach this. We typically, so the ACT regulation says that 90 days after the end of the model year, manufacturers reports that usually ends up being around the end of March. So we do receive the data around that time. We do generally have to clean up the data, go back and forth the manufacturers a bit, and then we try to publish it. So this year, I think we posted an initial draft report around the May timeframe.
That's right.
I think we're in this process of publishing a final report currently. So it does take time for that, just to make sure we can validate information needs to be corrected. And I'm not sure I can speak on behalf of the other
Let me
states.
just say, for frame of reference, the 2021 and 2022 reports, we posted those around October. Just last year, we did it a little earlier. And then it's up to each state as to when they do it, because that is language in the regulatory text. But Scott?
Yeah, so for New York State, I would mention that we did adopt that regulatory language that allows us to post the credit and deficit data. I'd say one thing that's delaying us a bit is we are still reaching out to some OEMs who have yet to report. So we're trying to finalize those before we you know, we'd rather not post incomplete information. So we're looking to get the full slate of OEMs to provide their sales data before we post. But yeah, I certainly understand the need for that and making decisions about moving credits around.
And I'll just note for Oregon, we've currently posted the 23 sales data. We're still going through the process of verifying the sales, so then we know how much credits are available, but we do hope to also post that fairly soon, and then plan to also do that for future model years.
It just one follow-up question. So is are all the states using the ACTR data reporting database from CARB, or are there different databases? What's the process there?
So I can't necessarily speak for the other states per se, but Oregon has definitely utilized the actors database, and it seemed as though most of the other states also were utilizing the same one.
Yeah, New York is as well. I agree. I'm pretty certain all are relying on that.
Okay, so if the data is in one central place, would it, I mean, would it be feasible to have like that reporting consolidated, just in terms of one public report at the end of each reporting year?
I think the issue is that each state has their own individual process on like what on how to like each state is implementing the regulation. There are some slight differences in how they're choosing to implement it, so we can't just say this will work for everyone when I know what California's procedure is. I can't speak for the other states, and they have certain things need to go through before they can post numbers that they're comfortable with.
Okay.
Thank you. Let's move to Sam Wilson. You can unmute and ask your question.
Hey, thanks. Good morning, everybody. Sam Wilson, Union of Concerned Scientists, Senior Vehicles Analyst based in the Bay Area. Just two quick questions. One, just wanted to confirm that the pooling scheme that you guys are considering now is in fact limited just to tractor vehicle types, and couldn't, so a manufacturer that say produced like a class 5 or 6 straight truck couldn't use those credits to offset tractor deployments. And then two, just wanted to ask, like, if in fact y'all aren't going to be able to release any other technical information ahead of January 3rd, if you could please share this presentation. Thanks.
Okay, two things. First, I want to make sure like two issues are separate. So in the ACT regulation as it's written right now, there's requirements for there's deficits basically for all vehicles, and there are deficits for tractors. Tractors are unique in that the only way to offset those deficits is with tractor credits. You can't use a class 5 truck to zero emission truck to offset the tractor requirement. So that's going to remain constant in this proposal. We're not looking at that currently. But beyond that, this proposal is kind of limited to just tractors by themselves at the moment. So tractor credits in one state could be pooled to another state potentially. That is when they are kind of seeking feedback on like if this needs to be offered to other types of vehicles, but that's a current proposal. So I wanted to keep those two separate. I thought I mentioned this earlier. I believe our presentation is posted on our website currently. Yeah, it is on our Advanced Clean Trucks webpage under meetings and workshops. The presentation is posted.
Great, thanks so much.
All right, let's go back to Joshua Lovelace. You can ask your question. Unmute and ask your question. Thank you.
Thank you. Just one more question. I've heard the term secondary manufacturer or OEM. I'm wondering what the criteria is for that, because I would consider us a secondary manufacturer. And again, I'm looking for some clarity into the credit market. So I'm wondering if there's some definition on what that entails, or some clarity, if you will.
Yeah, so in the Advanced Clean Trucks amendments that the board voted on in October, we did have a definition of secondary vehicle manufacturer that's meant to match the EPA definition. It's kind of long, but in essence, it will be anyone who takes a partially complete vehicle and finishes it turns it into a complete vehicle for sale. So, for example, if you're taking a chassis from an OEM and installing your body onto it, that'll make you a secondary vehicle manufacturer. So, by understanding, Miller Industries is a secondary vehicle manufacturer.
Yep, by that definition, I would agree. So that answers my question. I appreciate that. Thank you.
So I just want to make sure that we're kind of maybe for everybody who's participating understands the differences. So we took a recommendation to our board to amend the ACT regulation. And so adding that language about secondary manufacturer was something the board approved. And so we're just finishing the process for that. This is today's workshop is a separate effort to focus on the pooling aspect of, or a concept of pooling, that we would also be amending the ACT regulation, but in a separate rulemaking. So I just want to make sure we're kind of I want people to understand that those are different different regulatory process to make those amendments. So, but I understand that obviously they affect people in the audience. And again, I want to reiterate the ACT regulation is a requirement on the manufacturers, doesn't have require on the OEMs and not necessarily on the secondary manufacturer, but there is a provision to allow for credit trades if it's to the advantage of the secondary manufacturer, for instance. But that's a rulemaking process that's being finalized at this moment. But the board's already voted on that particular part.
Thank you.
Thank you. That is all the questions we have right now. Oh, wait.
Well, looks like one more. Well,
Yeah.
I'll pause for one moment. So I know I'll give people a chance to keep if they have any more think some more questions. But again, this is kind of we kind of want to hear from you all about maybe not today, in the near future, about any feedback you have on this or ACT as a whole. So if you have any questions, we're happy to hear them. So I guess we'll pass to Mike now.
We've got Mike. Yeah, Mike Tennell, you may ask your question.
Great, thank you very much. Mike Tunnell, American Trucking Association. Appreciate the presentation today. Just two questions. One is process. Can you speak to the EPA waiver process that would be involved in this rulemaking?
Well, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not certain I can actually answer that too well. My understanding is that we're not saying any standard in this rule, but I'm not sure I can say more than that.
So, I mean, I guess you have an existing waiver.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. We received a waiver for the Advanced Clean Trucks regulation back in 2022, which covers the Advanced Clean Trucks regulation as a whole. We don't believe that this rulemaking or would sets a new standard, so it would be under the existing waiver. But I'm not a lawyer, so yeah.
Right. I got it. Well, I hear you. But yeah, I mean, I'm just curious whether there is, CARB can just unilaterally amend their regulation as they do without any EPA involvement in this, other than the initial waiver, whether you need a within the scope determination or anything like that. And will you be seeking that? And it sounds like maybe we don't have the right people on the call, or
Yeah, I'm not the lawyer, but I think I can give you a lawyer answer. If we need a waiver from the EPA, we will request it. I think is the answer. And you kind of alluded to I think you even phrased the term that I think has been discussed in the past, and I'm not making a call, but is it within scope of the original rule? Well, I could say, well, look, what we're doing here is providing a little more flexibility. So if we need one, we'll ask for one, but that's a call that like it was. I mean, I'm sure if I asked the lawyer, that's pretty much what we would say, because at the end of the day, it depends on where we end up. Yeah. So that's my best answer today.
And maybe you could just clarify one thing for me, is if it's, a within the scope determination, is that still an EPA action, or is that just a CARB action?
Well, I think I can say I'll answer it in other rulemakings where we've gotten waivers from the EPA. I'm aware of at least instances where we've made amendments that we notified EPA is like, yeah, these are really within that original scope, and so there's really no need for a waiver, kind of thing. And then there's been other instances where it's like, no, the kind of changes we are making do require one. So I think both are possible outcomes.
Okay. Okay. Thanks. And then the other question is probably for the other states on the line and for CARB as well. Just curious, in my mind, I'm thinking this pooling would probably be California generating credits for deficits that are being created in New York and Oregon based on the current data. Is that kind of where, is that a correct assumption to make?
That's definitely.
Oh, go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, I mean, I can say that's definitely something we've considered. Like, policies in California are different than other states. We do have a lot of funding that other states don't have. So there's definitely the potential, and the ACF regulation. So there's definitely the potential that credits there'll be a significant amount of credits in California that could be used in other states. So part of the proposal is to safeguard against that possibility.
Yeah, and the key here is, even though that might be a bill, and the pooling is ultimately manufacturer by manufacturer. So any one manufacturer might have excess sales in California, for example, versus other states where other manufacturers might be deficient sales in California compared to some other states, depending on how things play out and their marketing strategy. So both are possible outcomes, but sure, we right now anticipate that manufacturers would exceed the sales requirement in California more frequently. Again, details to be worked out as to what those risks are.
Ultimately, we can't predict the future. There is a chance that sales could be fantastic in other states and worse here, but
Right. And so I guess the question in New York and Oregon is, based on your data, are you in deficit or are you surplus or what? I haven't really seen the data, so.
So I can speak to New York State at least. So our actual implementation of the ACT doesn't start until model year 2025, so we can't say for sure right now whether we're in compliance or not. I would say based on early credit generation from 22 and 23, for which we've seen data, I think it's a fair assessment to say that, California is producing more. But I would echo Paul in saying, we can't totally predict the future, as different funding streams come into place in New York State and the numbers may change. I think there's a lot that's up in the air.
Yeah, and I'll just say for Oregon, we're looking at what manufacturers have currently started utilizing the early credits. And so we're starting to see some accumulation of those credits. Again, we're still also waiting for the 2024 model year sales to see what that's going to look like for 25. So it is too early to tell, but we are investing a lot of money just in terms of incentives for vehicles and infrastructure to help support fleet transitions to zero emission vehicles. So that should also help with sales in Oregon. But yeah, as I think Scott was mentioning, it's too early to know for certain.
Great, thank you. We'll be interested in seeing the data. So when that gets posted, definitely we'll keep track of it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you. That's all the questions for now.
Okay. I guess we'll have a last call. Anyone has any questions lingering, feel free to put your hand up. And if not, I guess we can end things. Okay, still not seeing anything. All right. Well, if you could flip to the last slide again. So thank you all for your time. As we mentioned, this is our initial concept. We're really happy to hear feedback from anyone about what an appropriate pooling concept should be. Again, balancing what the other states are expecting in terms of the emission reductions and what manufacturers need in terms of compliance flexibility. So yeah, feel free to reach out to us either through the ACT reporting or you can send comments to the ACT reporting or reach out to us if you want to set up a meeting or just have a talk. Happy to do that. With that, thank you for your time. I think we'll end it here. Bye.